Red Bull is furious. Because just days before testing in Bahrain, new data leaked out, and it points straight at Mercedes. An engine that looks legal when it's cold, but changes completely once it heats up. Up to 15 extra horsepower. Up to 4/10 per lap. That's not a small edge. That's a championship advantage. And here's the part nobody expected. The FIA already approved it. Which means if Red Bull is right, Formula One is about to head into a political explosion. Before a single lap of testing is even completed. If this data is correct, the season could be decided before it even starts. Stay with me, and subscribe now, because what comes next explains why Red Bull believes the rules are being broken in plain sight. It started with a warning. One sentence. Shared quietly inside Red Bull's engine division. The numbers don't make sense. That's all it took. One engineer saw it first. Then another. Then the simulation started to raise red flags. Mercedes was running laps on private data. That didn't match anything seen before. Torque delivery too clean. Top speeds too high. Fuel burn unusually low. Red Bull had seen this pattern before. Not with Mercedes. With Ferrari. Back in 2019. A performance jump, followed by controversy, followed by silence. They couldn't ignore it this time. Because the projections weren't just surprising. They were impossible. In Red Bull's internal simulations, the Mercedes power unit was showing a projected gain of 4/10 per lap on long-run race pace. Not in perfect conditions. Not on low fuel. In full race trim. That kind of jump doesn't happen by accident. Not with stable regulations. Not with capped development. And here's what made it worse. Mercedes wasn't saying a word. No flex. No noise. Just quiet confidence. That's when Red Bull realized they weren't looking at a lucky upgrade. They were looking at something else. A design that had been built from the ground up to pass inspection, while behaving completely differently in the real world. It wasn't just innovation. It was timing, precision, control. And the scariest part? The FIA had already approved it. It all comes down to one detail. A detail most fans will never see. And one the FIA never tests properly. Heat. Because Formula One engines do not behave the same when they are cold, and when they are running flat out in race conditions. And Red Bull knows this better than anyone. Inside their technical group, the focus shifted to materials, metal composition, expansion rates, microscopic tolerances, things measured in fractions so small, they barely exist on paper. That's where the new data becomes terrifying. According to Red Bull's analysis, Mercedes designed internal engine components that expand in a very specific way. When the engine is cold, during FIA checks, everything looks perfect. The compression ratio sits exactly where the rules demand it. Clean, legal, approved. But once the engine reaches full operating temperature, under real track conditions, those components expand. Not randomly, not slightly, precisely. And that expansion reduces the volume inside the combustion chamber. Just enough to increase the real compression ratio far beyond what is allowed. On paper, it stays legal. In reality, it changes completely. This is where Red Bull's anger really begins. Because the regulations are clear about the limit, but they are vague about when and how it must be enforced. The FIA only measures engines at ambient temperature, not during a run, not after a stint, not when the engine is screaming down a straight. And Mercedes built their entire concept around that exact blind spot. Red Bull believes the real compression ratio jumps from the legal limit to a level that delivers a massive power gain. The kind of gain you cannot recover with aerodynamics, or strategy, or driving talent. The kind of gain that decides championships. And the most dangerous part? There is no easy way to prove it. Because once the engine cools down, the evidence disappears. This is why Red Bull is not just concerned. They are furious. Because from their perspective, this is not innovation within the spirit of the rules. This is engineering designed to exploit what the FIA does not look at. And with Bahrain approaching fast, they know exactly what comes next. Extreme heat, maximum stress, and the first real chance to see whether this engine changes when the lights go out. And if it does. For Red Bull, this isn't just a technical problem. It's a pattern. Because this has happened before. In 2019, Ferrari found a way to manipulate fuel flow sensors. It wasn't technically illegal, but it went against the spirit of the rules. The FIA reacted immediately. Investigated. Punished. Silenced. Ferrari's power vanished overnight. The message was clear. If you bend the rules, you pay the price. So now Red Bull is asking the obvious question. Why is Mercedes being protected? Because this time, the data is just as suspicious. The performance gains are just as dramatic. And yet, no investigation, no warnings, no technical directives, just silence. And to Red Bull, that silence feels like favoritism. Not just a mistake, not just incompetence, but a system that protects some teams while punishing others. And that is what they refuse to accept. Behind the scenes, Red Bull has already pushed the alarm. They've taken their findings directly to the FIA. They've demanded answers. They've called for clarification of the testing protocols. And the response? Nothing. No comment. No rule adjustment. No sign that anything will change before Bahrain. Which means one thing. Red Bull is preparing to go public. They know what happens next. If the engine works in the desert heat, if Mercedes shows that same mid-corner torque spike, that same straight-line pull, that same unbeatable consistency, Red Bull won't stay quiet. They will protest. Loudly. Visibly. Relentlessly. Because they believe this is more than a loophole. This is a crack in the foundation of the sport. And if the FIA does not act, Red Bull will make sure the world sees it for what it is. Because Red Bull is not alone anymore. Ferrari, Honda, Audi, they've all seen the same data. And now, what started as a private concern has turned into a full-scale uprising against the FIA's silence. This is no longer team versus team. This is a power struggle for the future of the sport. In the last 2 weeks, at least 3 manufacturers have quietly joined Red Bull's position. Not because of loyalty, not because of rivalry, but because the numbers are impossible to ignore. Ferrari's simulations confirm it. Honda's analysts have seen it. Even Audi, who won't fully enter until next year, has begun preparing legal frameworks in case this engine sets a dangerous precedent. Because here's the truth. If Mercedes is allowed to keep running this design, everyone else has to either copy it or get left behind. And not every team can afford that. This is where the tension turns political. The FIA is under pressure from every direction. Red Bull wants immediate action. Ferrari wants precedent enforced. Honda wants technical clarification. And Audi? They want assurance that the rules won't keep shifting after they join. But Mercedes? They're not blinking. Because from their perspective, they did everything right. They built the engine. They disclosed the design. They passed every single check. They followed the rules, exactly as written. And now? They hold all the power. Because if the FIA decides to suddenly change the rule, or ban the engine mid-season, Mercedes is ready to fight. Legally. Publicly. Completely. Insiders say their legal team has already prepared documentation. Internal emails. Sign-off records. Proof that the FIA approved everything. And if the sport tries to backpedal now? Mercedes will not go quietly. That's the trap. The FIA is stuck. If they do nothing, they protect Mercedes and risk alienating half the grid. If they act now, they trigger a legal war that could tear the championship apart. So instead, they're stalling, delaying, saying nothing. And that silence is only fueling the fire. This is it. The desert. The track. The final test before the real fight begins. Bahrain is not just a warm-up. It's a battlefield. Because once those engines fire up, all the theory becomes reality. And Red Bull will be watching. Every lap. Track temperatures are expected to climb above 40 degrees Celsius. The exact conditions Mercedes needs to trigger its controversial engine behavior. In heat, metal expands. Ratios shift. Combustion dynamics evolve. And if the data is accurate, this is when the real compression ratio jumps from the legal 16:1 to a devastating 18:1. Red Bull's engineers know it. Ferrari suspects it. Everyone on the grid is holding their breath. Because this is the moment when Mercedes will show their hand. Telemetry will be public. Lap times will be tracked. Sector splits will tell the story. And if Mercedes shows a sudden, unexplained gain in top speed, in mid-corner acceleration, in fuel efficiency, it won't be speculation anymore. It'll be confirmation. And once that happens, the paddock will erupt. Red Bull has already prepared their move. If the performance spike appears, they will file a formal protest before the end of the test session. Not after Bahrain. Not after Melbourne. Immediately. Because for them, this is no longer a question of interpretation. This is a matter of principle. They are not just defending themselves. They are defending the integrity of the championship. But what if the performance isn't obvious? What if Mercedes keeps it subtle? What if the engine stays within margins? Just enough To avoid suspicion? Then the game continues. And Red Bull will be forced to wait, to gather more data, to watch every race, like a courtroom hearing. Because one way or another, this isn't ending in Bahrain. It's just beginning. Red Bull has run every scenario. And the most terrifying one? Is the one where Mercedes wins, without breaking a single rule. Because if that engine is allowed to run as is, with no ban, no restrictions, no performance limit, then Mercedes has just flipped the championship on its head. The gains? They're not hypothetical anymore. 4 tenths per lap, 17 seconds over a race distance, a full season advantage, built into the combustion chamber. And here's the problem. Red Bull can't protest what's legal. They can't stop what's approved. So if the loophole stands, there is only one option left. Copy it. Even if they hate it. Even if it goes against everything they believe in. Even if it means rebuilding their engine program. From scratch. Mid-season. Because in Formula 1, principles don't win titles. Performance does. But copying the design won't be easy. The Mercedes engine wasn't a quick fix. It was the result of years of research. Precise material science. Hundreds of simulations. And a strategic reading of the rules. Before anyone else saw the opportunity. For Red Bull to catch up, they'd need time. But time is the one thing they don't have. By the time their version is ready, if it's even possible, the championship could already be out of reach. And that's the worst-case scenario. Not losing on track. Not losing a protest. Losing because the game changed. Before anyone knew it. Because one team outthought the rest. And the rulebook let them. Red Bull isn't just fighting for themselves anymore. They're fighting to delay the collapse of the season. Before it even begins. Because if they fail, if this engine dominates from Bahrain to Abu Dhabi, then no one will remember the protest. No one will remember the outrage. They'll only remember that Mercedes won. Legally, cleverly, and completely.